Thanks everybody for logging in. We'll be getting started in just one moment. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us today as part of ADAC Digital Day. My name is Bobby Bonet. I'm the Vice President of Digital Strategy for Sandow Design Group, which includes several architecture and design media brands, including Interior Design, Metropolis, and of course, Lux Interiors and Design. In fact, I'm sat right now in front of the Lux Southeast January-February 2021 cover, which features the work of interior designer Barry Benson from Barry Benson Interior Design, and architects Matt Benson and Julius Richardson of Meyer Greason, Paul and Benson. Because I can't help myself a little about the project, architect Matt Benson and designer Barry Benson revised a classic Georgian residence in Charlotte for longtime friends. The wife's treasured collection of Ameriware porcelain inspired the color palette for the whole home, especially the convivial library, which features insets of flat vernacular wallpaper, a Tom Felicia designed Chesterfield sofa for Vanguard Furniture, and a pair of Barry's signature Mary Jane swivel chairs for Highland House. I'm thrilled to be joined by a truly impressive panel today for a discussion on social media etiquette and strategy. Over the course of the discussion, please feel free to submit questions using the Q&A feature down below. And then if we have time at the conclusion of our discussion, we'll try to get to as many of those questions as possible. If you'd ever like to reach out directly to me, by the way, you can at bbonet@sandowdesign.com. So let's get the party started here. First up, I'd like to hello Lori, hello Kiana, hello Robert. We're going to go through some introductions right now. First, I'd like to introduce Kiana Bowen. Kiana, how's it going?
Hi, good. Glad to be here.
So Kiana is joining us today from Maryland, where she is an interiors photographer and blogger of the popular design and lifestyle blog East and Lane. As a photographer and content creator, Kiana's work has been featured in Domino, House Beautiful, My Domain, and more. She's also the host of The Renter's Guide to DIY, a home makeover web series for Lowe's Home Improvement, and a design contributor for Emily Henderson Design. When she's not traveling for photo shoots, you can find Kiana enjoying beautiful, the slow-paced lifestyle, rather, of coastal Maryland with her husband, Daniel, and fur babies. Kiana, what are the name of your fur babies?
I have a little Maltese named Sophie, and I have a cat named Bear.
Very nice. I'm actually, right next to me is my fur baby, Bernie. And if we hear loud breathing, it's probably him sleeping throughout the panel. So Kiana, I'd love to ask you our first icebreaker question today. I'd love for you to tell us about one of your most popular posts on your Instagram feed.
Sure. I love this question because my answer may be a little bit unexpected. Of course, I try to curate my feed with pretty images and make it aesthetically pleasing. But recently I kind of flipped the switch and I was kind of tired of the whole illusion of perfection that I think social media often portrays. And I wanted to show more real representation of my life and of my house and my body. And sometimes that's not always pretty and it's not always photo worthy. And so I posted this photo of my home office that I'm going to be making over. And it wasn't the highest rated post, but it was one of my most engaged posts. And what was really cool was that, a lot of times when I post a pretty picture, the engagement is very not thoughtful. It's like heart emojis or, love it, or where's the sofa from or something like that. But the engagement on this photo actually elicited reactions that were thoughtful. And it was really good to see that, you don't always need a beautiful image to capture your audience.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kiana. The next member of our panel is Robert Peterson, who hails from, I guess you can say right here in Atlanta, Georgia. Yeah. Robert's background is in film editing, but he found his way into interiors photography in 2013. Robert brings a spirit of intentionality and storytelling to every space, subject, and place he captures. Robert, I'd like for you to tell folks the backstory and relevance, specifically, I guess, to the conversation we're going to have today about this particular Instagram post.
Yeah, so this photo was a photo I actually captured for Linda MacArthur, who's a local architect. with Studio Entourage. This photo, there's a lot of great little factors about this photo. It's a great mudroom. That door is so unique. That was custom built. You have a great little mini golden doodle just sitting there who we got to stay in place. But this photo got circulated pretty heavily, and I'd never like to say going viral because I don't think it hit any type of status for that. But I would say I probably came across 3 or 4 dozen different people sharing it, from small single off posts, just private handles, to larger, 800,000, 900,000, $1 million influencers who are resharing this, but with just terrible credit given towards the original creators of it, both myself and then the architect, the designer, the builder. So yeah, it's this one post I actually posted and wrote about it because I was seeing it in so many places getting reshared that I just felt I had to address it at some point, because if you have 1 million followers and you're sharing images like this, there's a good chance you're creating revenue of some sort. So I'm glad we're talking about this today.
Awesome. Thank you, Robert. And finally, the third member of our STEAM panel today is Lori Paranjape. Lori, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Lori, of course, from Mrs. Paranjape Design and Interiors. Lori's joining us today from Nashville, Tennessee, and is widely recognized for her new classic aesthetic. Her design work is published frequently across digital and print platforms, design blogs, and shared daily on her own Instagram feed. As you can see here, you can follow Lori at Mrs. Paranjape. Among the publications in which Lori has been published is People, Architectural Digest, Elle Decor, Traditional Home, and many others. And a fun fact, and I'm on the hot seat today, Lori was a TV reporter prior to starting her design career. Thank you for joining, Lori. And Lori, can you tell us, I love this question, and it's a question that I'm constantly thinking of as well. What's your favorite social media platform that is not Instagram?
Well, I do love the gram. Spent a lot of time there, hang out, and have met amazing people there. But I am secretly dabbling in TikTok.
Interesting.
And not for my sweet dance moves either, but I've been putting together and learning my way through, and haven't been talking about it publicly because I want to develop what my voice is and how that platform might be useful to my business. But yeah, if you want to be, if you'd like to be cutting edge on the TikTok like myself, you can follow me at Mrs. Paranjape on TikTok. And I'm kind of sharing over there too in a different way, just a different feeling, different vibe, different audience.
It is very exciting, whether it's TikTok, whether it's Clubhouse, the emergence and proliferation of new platforms, how they start to evolve as time goes on, going from a dance platform to potentially a platform for design inspiration one day, right? We'll see.
Right.
The first question I'd like to pose to all of our panelists today, and Lori, we'll start with you, and then Robert and Kiana, is if you could share, and maybe if our audience could take away with them today, one do and then one don't when it comes to sharing content online. So you first, Lori.
A do for me can really be like bullet point and take it home. It's ask permission from the creator. So, there are typically partnerships between designers and photographers are often the place where the images begin, these beautiful images. Like what Robert showed, I saw that all over the internet, Robert, and I had no idea it was your image. So I probably saved it and your name's probably not on it. So ask permission would be a do, and a don't would be to perhaps use the success of another to contribute to your own success.
Thanks, Lori. How about you, Robert?
I would say do definitely credit the creative team. That would be my biggest do, is tag them both in the text and in the photo. A don't, this is very specific for photography, don't apply filters to photos. Like, if you've gone through the trouble of hiring a photographer and we have stressed over that image, please don't post it and apply the gingham filter and then put it out there and then appropriately tag, because that just breaks our heart. And I'm just going to speak for all photographers there. Please don't do that.
Is that the filter that drives you the most nuts, the gingham filter?
No, it's the only one I actually can remember the name of, and I want to be trendy right now that I knew Instagram. But no, I've seen it happen a handful of times, and I've definitely seen images that I've taken be re-edited and have scenery or foliage re-edited and then shared out there. So you're really dabbling in an area of don't there.
Thanks, Robert. How about you, Kiana?
Yeah, I share similar sentiments as everyone else. My do is definitely do ask permission from the photographer, designer, whoever the creator is, before sharing the image. And my don't is don't share a photo without permission. No, I think my don't would be um, if you are a designer or creative or someone in the creative service business. I don't want to tell you what to do with your feed, but I would say don't let the majority of your feed be of someone else's work. So again, I'm not here to say, how much of other people's work you should or should not share, but personally, I like to adhere to, like, I don't know, maybe a 90-10 or a 80-20 rule, where, like, if you go to my profile, the first 9 images that you see, I don't want any more than maybe 1 or 2 of those images to be of someone else's work. And if I am sharing someone else's work, then those 2 images I would have asked permission to use them beforehand on top of that.
It's a great takeaway. I love that, the 90-10 rule. I think that's a really
I don't know if that's what I do. Again, I don't know if it works for other people, but it's just about, mostly if you're in the design or creative service business, you should mostly have your own work on your feed.
Well, let's talk a little bit about a dirty word, I think, when it comes to image sharing on social media, and that's exposure, right? I mentioned exposure when the 4 of us got together a week or 2 ago, and I think everybody cringed at the idea of, hey, I put my photo on my Instagram. I put your photo on my Instagram feed, and I have 250,000 followers. You should be thanking me, even if I didn't ask for permission, even if I didn't pay for a licensing agreement to be able to share your photo. So Lori, I see you smiling. Why isn't guaranteeing exposure for a designer in your instance a fair alternative to paying for a photo?
Well, and I want to be a positive social player, right, in the social sandbox. So I don't wish to be a naysayer or, be negative, but I have several budgets within my business. The second largest budget within my business is paying for photography. So I've made a tremendous investment in that as a strategic move for my business. So I would like to have those images shared in a way that respects the investment I've made and the commitment that the photographer has made and the arrangement that we have. And while in the beginning of my career, it was flattering to be shared in some of these larger platforms, now it's kind of turned for me. And I know a tremendous amount of other people where it feels like, snagging a screenshot of work that I've done for several years, and a tremendous amount of energy and cooperation and collaboration and client, payment and photography payment, all sorts of things, to then just have it used for someone else's gain, and then be told, yeah, but you might get some followers, is not equitable.
So I'm going to play the role of devil's advocate with a wink and a nod today. Robert, I think there's an interesting question from one of our attendees, which is, all right, time is of the essence, right? I see a beautiful photo and I want to be able to use it on my account, whether I'm an account, as you mentioned before, and someone with an inspiration account. Why isn't credit enough? And can I start with issuing credit and then reaching out later to ask about redistributing the photo? What's sort of the best practices here from the lens of a photographer to be able to gain access to a photo, whether it's to use it on a blog, on a social media platform, or in some other medium?
So I know, like, the rules with photography and Instagram is changing a lot, and there's been actually a lot legally. So I don't know exactly what the legal recourse is right now as far as how things are. I've never really gone after anybody on Instagram for resharing of images. You would just spend all of your time doing that if that's what you did. I think what's most important first is, and again, I'm only speaking from the photographer. For a designer, I feel like it's very different, because again, I'm just capturing their work. Seeing the imagery shared is really great because it will put more designers' eyes on my photography, and it could essentially lead to more hires. So I feel we need to address this kind of from 2 angles, both as like the designer and the photographer. Even as the photographer though, I'm very protective of the clients that have invested in me and that I've worked with. So if I see another designer sharing that image and tagging it, I'm really quick to kind of go through, read how did they set up that caption. And a lot of times, If a designer's resharing it or an influencer's resharing it or just a blogger, you kind of know if you're in a gray zone. And I think the easiest way to kind of spot that is read the comments and see how that person is responding to comments on the thing. If they're writing and people are writing and saying, oh my God, I love this space, and they're just responding, thank you, or me too, or anything else, and they're not actually readdressing it to the designer whose space it is, I feel like what they know they're doing is probably not right. And so in that case, I have gone in before and commented, oh, I love this space. I loved working with Lori Paranjape on this. Just to kind of like put it out there and be like, you kind of know this isn't perfectly accurate. I don't know if that was your question, but I went a different direction just because.
Sure, that's so I'm happy to go in as many directions as possible today. And I think, like, there two words that kind of play along with one another, or two types of content distribution that play along with one another today are creation versus curation, right? Kiana, you mentioned inspiration accounts. And when you're managing your own account, making sure that there's original IP being shared versus sharing too many inspiration or too many photos that give you inspiration on your own account. So can you talk a little bit about when you have your curation hat on, how you kind of handle for one, identifying and finding the types of photos and projects that you want to highlight, and then two, what your process is for working with a designer or a photographer to go ahead and curate and redistribute and share with your audience that project or that photo?
Sure. So usually when I am looking to share an inspiration photo, it's somewhat connected to a project I'm working on for the blog, and I needed to say, like, this is kind of the direction I'm thinking about going. So it's usually tied to, a personal experience. But the first thing I do is DM the creator. And a lot of people, I had a conversation on my Insta stories a while ago about my new process of how I always ask for permission. And people were like, oh, that would take so long. Like, and it really doesn't. People are so readily available and easily accessible now through social media. So the first thing I do is I send a DM, and literally usually within 24 to 48 hours, I get a response. Most of the time it's yes, sure. And then once I get permission, in the caption, and my intent behind it is always to not just credit the photographer, designer, and the other players at the end, but mention as early as possible, like, this image is from so-and-so, this is why I'm sharing it, this is how I feel about it, things of that nature. So my curation process, it's not often where I have instances where I, need to share a ton of inspiration photos in my feed. And even more so now, I'm trying to step away from that, since I know that there are a lot of creators out there who do not want their work shared on other people's feed anymore. But again, my process is mainly just first ask permission, to note be very honoring in the caption concerning whose work it is. And then when I get responses in the comments, as far as like, where's the sofa from, or things that about the image, even if I know where the sofa's from, I never tell them where it is. I tell them, this is so-and-so's image, you can reach out to them. And another thing I don't do is I won't hashtag the photo if it's not mine. So I also see a lot of inspiration accounts that use hashtags after they post the image. And when you hashtag something, you're basically giving permission to whoever the hashtag owner is to reuse the image, which if it's not my own image, I don't have permission to do that. So that's just another little takeaway, is if you are sharing other people's images, ask permission, be clear in your caption, be clear in the comments, and don't hashtag is kind of my process.
I like that hashtag rule. And that's one I haven't heard before. Lori, how about for you, when you're looking to share sources of inspiration for what you're doing on the design side, will you turn to Instagram or social media to share actual images, or do you handle it a different way?
I made a decision to have my feed not have anything but my own work. So there are not inspiration images in my feed. I used to, and I would credit the photographer and the designer. And if I knew it was in a magazine or I knew who a stylist was, I would put credit in. But for me, it's a matter of when you know better, you do better. And when it started to feel not great to have it done to me, then I went back through my feed and removed any images that were not my own work. My feed is my portfolio. And when people are designer shopping and looking, they are assuming that the work on my page is my own, and they're not necessarily reading through the captions to find out who created that. So I decided that then the only thing that they would see from me is me. So it's all my work, and there's nothing else being shared there, and the images are credited.
So I think, Robert, you mentioned attribution at the beginning of today's discussion. Lori, you just mentioned it. Kiana, you were focused on it a moment ago. What is the right amount of attribution to give, right? Does it start with the photographer and end there? Does it start with the designer and end there? How should we be deciding, how the lengths we should go to make sure we're tagging, every person who may have had a role in the project that we're sharing to our feed? If I could start with you, Robert.
Yeah, so I mean, it's simple for me because how I tag is simply who was involved financially in the day and who was involved creatively in the day. And those are the people I make sure to tag. I have had companies reach out to me before and say, hey, I'll use a builder. Hey, we were the builder of that house. Do you mind tagging us? And say they were not involved at all with the photo shoot. I more than likely will still go and tag them. As far as once other people start resharing that image, I think it's important that however the designer posted their tags or however the photographer posted their tags, that's what you need to copy. That's what you need to emulate, because they're tagging the people that they know are important and were involved to that day. I think where you could draw the line for me, I always draw the line at who was there that day or who contributed in a financial sense in helping hire the photographer. If there were multiple companies involved in that, if there was a stylist involved, if there was a floral stylist involved, those people should all be credited. As far as going through and tagging furniture or Kohler or different vendors, if the designer wants to do that, but from a photography standpoint, I would never go that deep into tagging all those brands.
Lori, how about you? I saw you nodding when Robert was mentioning the vendors and manufacturers featured in photo.
I think this is me in the midst of learning and understanding and gathering information and being a respectful player in the social media game. So I agree with what Robert said. I think tagging everyone, all of the sourcing in a design image is not necessarily, I have paid for those items in the image. The vendor has been paid for those items. And designer sources are, really well curated and long, hard fought battles to find unique things. So I don't at this point really feel like everything in the image needs to be tagged and offered as a source guide for people to just swipe up and click so that they can go buy it also, because that's of course what my clients are paying me for. So to sell off of those images, in my opinion, disrespects the client who has paid me to have some insider info directly from me. So I tag stylist, photographer, myself on the image because I do know that people are screenshotting and taking the image, but I'm open to learning. If I'm wrong about this, I'm listening.
I think that's important. I mean, we've received 8 or 10 questions already. And I don't think anybody knows what the tried and true answer is, right? There are gray areas that we have to contend with, again, based on the perspective you're coming from, based on the platform on which you're sharing photography and projects or inspiration. Kiana, does it change for you the way in which you're framing a beautiful project or a beautiful photo based on whether you're sharing on Instagram versus whether you're sharing on your blog?
Yes. So on my blog, if I am using inspiration images, I don't necessarily ask for permission first. I just follow the standard APA guidelines for crediting, similar to how a news source would. But for social media, I adhere to the ask permission, proper credit, proper caption, things of that nature. But for the blog, I do it more like a newspaper or magazine would as far as the crediting goes.
Very nice. Thanks, Kiana. If we can go back to those inspiration accounts, like what's sort of the message, I guess, Robert, you would have for a pure aggregator, whether it's somebody on Pinterest or somebody on Instagram, who might have 1 million followers, right? And who might say, you know, the pleasure is yours, Robert, that we managed, that we shared your photo with the beautiful golden doodle and the custom door on our feed, and we tagged you, Robert. So thank us later. Like, how should if I'm the manager of an account, how should I kind of change my strategy now that I've already built the following of 1 million folks, for example?
If you got the tags right, I'm actually probably pretty happy with you, because chances are by the time it circulates that much tags, I've been tagged as the designer myself. I've seen the architect tagged for photo credit. So if you got tags right, I'm probably pretty happy. This is such an evolving situation we've run into. I don't know the firm answer right now. I think the most important thing right now, if anybody takes away from this, is please at least credit appropriately. If you're another designer and you're looking at sharing other designers' work, make sure you're clear and concise about that on the front end, because as this keeps evolving and people find ways to better handle all this, we'll get better at it. But right now, I think the best thing people can do going forward is make sure you credit appropriately. And honestly, do like both ladies have said, ask permission on the front end.
Just to kind of piggyback off of what Robert said, if I can jump in, if there's a moment.
Of course.
I've had my photos shared on accounts that have 2 million plus followers. And don't let the exposure thing woo you. You do not get that many follows back if that's what you're looking for. Yes, sure, maybe, you know, a handful of people have found me from that, but I get more followers when smaller accounts share me than I do from the big accounts. But I do think there is, like, I've seen a lot of memes circulating with like exposure don't pay my bills, like stuff like that. So I do think that there is a culture shift where less and less people are okay with the whole can we use this image for exposure. I don't think brands will be able to continue to get away with that for much longer. But being a newbie, you know, photographer and newbie design blogger, and when I say newbie, I mean like have been doing it for less than 5 years, I understand the enticement of having a brand or having, you know, someone share your image or wanting you to do something for exposure. My whole thing now is like experience over exposure. So when deciding to work with a brand, or if I'm going to do something for free, it's kind of like, do I need the experience? Is there something I can learn from it? Is there knowledge I can gain from it? And if not, then I don't do it. But again, it's just kind of like, you need to weigh the exposure, because if it's to get followers or if it's to get clients, it doesn't always equate millions to millions.
Yeah, and I think if I can tag onto that as well, I think this is a spot where, you know, I think that's great, Robert, that you feel good about it and you feel good about the tag. And, you know, I think to each his own. I do think that inspo accounts and any business screenshotting a licensed image and then sharing it for their own benefit is not okay. And I think the conversation is shifting. And like we said at the open, you know, the concept of flattery or those sorts of things are behind us. And I think we're aware of it. The only allegory I can kind of say is we used to not understand the concept of paying for music. We should not have to pay for that. I don't know anyone who doesn't have a music subscription to have access to the music. I pay several, and most people have Pandora or Apple Music or whatever they pay for. And I think we're moving in that direction, where if you would like to enjoy the imagery and if you would like to use the imagery in some way, that there's either a subscription or there is, but I don't think it's an unattainable idea that, you know, these are valuable things. These images are valuable, or people wouldn't be taking them, right? I think we need to make sure that we're either paying for it or making sure that the person who created it is okay with the arrangement. But no permission, I think everyone has heard it at least once. So I think the lack of information is not a great excuse anymore.
You mentioned permission. We've spoken about permission, Lori. So I'm sure there, and I know just based on following y'all on Instagram, that there are posts where you've tagged multiple contributors to a photo, right? Photographer, designer, builder, manufacturer, whoever it may be.
Mhm.
Now somebody reaches out to you, Lori, and says, "I'd like to share this photo on my account." Should the person who's asking be reaching out to the other folks tagged in the photo? Should the implication be that you are able to determine the distribution rights of the photo? I understand you might eventually say we're going to need to discuss a licensing agreement here, but what's sort of the process that somebody should go through when they are looking for permission to share a photo and they do see multiple accounts tagged in an image?
Well, so I can speak from experience to this. So, I've shared a few new projects recently, and for a while, even up to a few weeks ago, I was tagging some of the brands because I have relationships with them and I have licensing opportunities on the horizon, and I have, a sense of community. And so I tagged them, and a few of those brands just posted it as if the tag was permission to take it. So then I started reassessing, what does the tagging mean and what does that do and how do I connect and all those sorts of things. A couple of others reached out and said, "Oh, we love this image. Please reply with hashtag whatever to allow us to use it." And I looked at the contract that I would be signing if I replied. And they have global license, unlimited, unrestricted license. Which means it can be on their website, it can be their ad campaign, it can be the cover of a magazine, it can be edited, it can be filtered, it can be cropped. I've had that experience where a photographer of mine sold one of my images and allowed it to be edited to become an ad campaign with changed items in the space and things like that. So my response to that brand was, "I adore your product and would love to discuss collaboration on many upcoming projects where I've specified your items." So it was a no to the reshare, but it was a yes to a conversation about how we can be partners in the industry.
How about we flip that around? And Robert, if you see a photo on a designer's feed that you had a hand in producing, or you had shot the photo and you're not tagged, we have a couple of questions regarding the best way for you to reach out to the designer and nudge them without ruining a relationship that they haven't tagged you. I mean, is it as simple as, "Hey, can you throw my tag on there?" If you're dealing with a repeat offender, do you have to roll up the sleeves a little bit? What's sort of your strategy on the relationship management side?
And the question, is it a designer that obviously hired me to come take this photo? It's not a third-party designer. Okay. If it's a designer who's hired me, more than likely we have a good open relationship and it was probably an accident. I would just reach out to them. I would DM them quickly and say, "Hey, do you mind tagging me on this?" Yeah, it's definitely, I think that would be the most straightforward way to go. If I ever see a designer's work, say I saw Lori's work shared on another designer's feed, I would contact Lori just to make her aware of it, I think is where I would start with that.
Great. So we've talked a little bit about and touched on the photo shoot, right? And all of the pieces that come into play ahead of the actual photos being edited and ready to be distributed, but the factors that might go into and what folks should think about when they're getting ready to hire a photographer to shoot a project. What's some best practices when you're getting set to hire a photographer that might guard you against headaches down the road when it comes to distribution and rights? I guess we'll start with you, Robert.
So I would actually, and I wanted to mention this a second ago when Lori was talking, I think one thing that's really important when you talk with your photographer on the front end, find out what rights exactly you're getting from your photographer. I think a lot of people by default think they're getting the copyright when they might only be receiving a license and usage right. Have that conversation. If the photographer has a contract that you guys can go over first, just go over that just so you know. Then going into the actual shoot, obviously you're going to handle things like pricing and the structure of the day. The other thing you might look at doing, and maybe you'll jump to this later, is if we're talking about bringing brands or other companies involved into this, you might want to bring them in at the beginning. This will do a few different things for you. I have one designer I shoot with quite frequently. He's a master at finding a way to partner with brands where I don't know if he's ever actually paid me out of pocket once for a photo shoot. He almost always finds a way to work with these brands, work with these third-party companies, find a need they have on a project he's working with, And then we go in and photograph essentially for the brand and for him as well. So the more homework you do on the front end, finding out what you can do there, you can probably save yourself money. You'll save yourself a lot of headache too, because if that brand wants to reshare it, you basically already have gotten them to pay for that image on the front end. So things like that can be really helpful.
And as you mentioned, it can be a cost savings measure for the client in some respects if they're sharing the cost of that photo shoot with a brand or with other.
Absolutely. I mean, I won't diverge too much into like pricing, but like I work with a tier pricing structure where essentially if the designer hires me, I'll always encourage them, is the architect involved in this, interested in the photo shoot? Because essentially my price goes up slightly, but you can split the cost of the day then. I've had as many as actually 5 different companies come in on one photo shoot. And then that allows all them license and access to the photos. I don't sign over copyright because that could get very messy if you're giving copyright to a bunch of different companies at the same time. But I think that's really important. And Lori brought up a good point because she may be getting copyright directly from her photographer, but don't assume you are. If that's something you want, make sure you're talking about that, because what that means is then in the end, if a brand, if another company comes and wants to purchase that photo, they're purchasing the photo from the person who owns the copyright. So it just be clear on that up front so you don't get caught off guard down the road by it.
So Kiana, is the process the same for you as a photographer, or are there sort of different practices you employ? And I guess by virtue of that, will the process be different based on the photographer you're working on?
Yeah, my process is very much the same as far as, price sharing and cost sharing and things of that nature. I completely agree with Lori and Robert to reach out to the brands on the front end of things, because it's very hard to get them to agree to things retroactively. And that's because a lot of times when you're working with brands, kind of how Robert mentioned, is you have to get a set of photos that is specifically for them and of their product, as well as the full space. So I'm working with a few brands now for my living room, and not only am I getting gifted products and paid for my services, but at the same time they have different styling directives and things like that that the brand needs for the image that they're paying for, that they're offering me free products for. So there is a little bit more homework that has to be done. You can't just take the image of the whole living room that has competing brands furniture in it and then say, hey, like, if you guys are interested in it, buy it from me. But they're like, well, this is like not only our stuff in it. So if you can on the front end, if you know that there's certain vendors you want to work with, reach out to them, see if you can partner with them and build relationships with them. And kind of what Rob and Lori was alluding to, you would be able to, not have to pay for a lot of your photo shoots sometimes, but there is an additional amount of work for the photographer as far as making sure that each client, vendor, architect, designer is getting the photos that they need out of the deal.
Lori, I see you're nodding your head.
Yeah, I'm with her on that. I think understanding what Robert said was really, really important, because as a young designer, I did not read my photography contract. And that's when my images were used in a way that had I known and understood things better, I would have never agreed to. If you want details of that story, slide into my DMs and I'll be happy to share which photography contract might be difficult for designers. But I now bring my own contract to a photographer because I have PTSD. So, of these bad relationships. So we learn from everything, right? And sometimes we learn to protect ourselves, and sometimes we learn to do better. But the contract says, I'm using this for social media. I'm using this for my website. I'm using this for web. If I will, credit, reasonably credit whenever possible. And, I'm using the words that I'm trying to have used for me. I'm trying to make this a really good relationship and have it all out in the open, because we do, it feels better when you understand and when communication is clear before. And, that applies to my design business. When I'm, making an arrangement with a new client, I'm like, I want you to really, really understand. This is, if we have to break up, this is how we break up. If this is what happens to your design fee, if we part ways, this is how I will take images and I will share them on the Instagram. So I'm very upfront. So I like to know, I like to know. So I feel like that's really important with a photographer, that everyone really understands how these things are going to be used. So then you don't end up with bad relationships or relationships that sour because of misunderstandings, or not really sharing your intent for the images. So I bring my own contract to the table.
That's
Hey,
interesting.
Bobby, I was looking in the chat, not to kind of overstep, but someone
No,
in
how
the
about
chat
it?
was made a comment about what I was just talking about influencers. Should they have to reveal when products are gifted or sponsored for transparency? And yes, as a blogger and influencer, you do have to reveal when you're partnering with someone. A lot of times that's in a hashtag where you'll see like so and so partner. And that's usually how you are revealing that this was gifted. And then if you're paid, a lot of times you'll see like paid sponsorship also tagged on the Instagram posts.
And that's contractual. You know, when I've had partnerships with brand, they say in advance, every time you post, you must say this, it must say ad, it must be exclusive. You know, they lay out those details because, you know, again, contracts help us stay happy. They're not ugly. Contracts help us manage expectations and set guidelines. So yeah, revealing all of that stuff should be settled up front so everybody feels good about it.
Well, speaking of contracts, and here's a tricky one. The distribution rights of, and this question comes from Alana, of platforms unto themselves, right? If I'm uploading a video to Facebook or adding a photo to Instagram, when we sign up for Instagram and Facebook, we're agreeing to Instagram and Facebook's rules about content distribution as well. And as Alana points out, there's a global non-exclusive license for Instagram. So does that ever play into the back of your mind when you're sharing a photo onto a social media platform, that that platform then has some right to redistribute or distribute your photo? Or is this one of those necessary evils where this is where the audience is, and I'm going to have to play by the platform's rules even if I don't love it?
I just don't read the terms and conditions on Instagram. I don't know what I agreed to. Yeah, I know there's a lot of, that is a big point that a lot of people make. That does not, however, disannul you from what you should be doing to share other people's work. So I don't necessarily care that Instagram might have rights to whatever. However, that does not mean that you now have the right to whatever. So
Great.
Still play and play fair and do what is appropriate for each situation, but don't just throw Facebook and Instagram's terms and conditions on me.
I'd like to take a couple minutes to talk about social media strategy. And again, if folks have additional questions, you can send them in the chat or in the Q&A box. Three panelists today who have beautiful Instagram feeds, create beautiful work. And that's one of the reasons I think, Kiana, why I loved your icebreaker image, because we were looking at a before photo versus an after photo. What are some of the keys? I'll start with you, Kiana, to an engaging photo or an engaging post on social media?
Yeah, so prior to maybe posting that image, I would say, have professional photography and make sure it's well lit and, all those things. But I think the key to not necessarily just an engaging photo, but being engaging on social media is authenticity. And I think, society is kind of hitting a boiling point with perfection, and we're craving realness right now, which is why I think that image worked so well for me. And I've been talking to a lot of designers and colleagues, and a lot of them are expressing the same sentiments of how they're kind of not even liking social media anymore just because of comparison, or feeling like they don't measure up, or feeling like they're being judged for not sharing a photo correctly, or whatever it is. And the list goes on. And if you watch the documentary Social Experiment, then how psychologically damaging social media can be, and how narcissistic it is kind of making our society. And so I think we're going to eventually hit a breaking point where this strive for elusive perfection, we're going to need a release from that. And I think that release valve is going to come from accounts that are real and that are authentic and that show the good and the bad, the before photos and the after photos, and everything in between. So I guess my advice on how to be engaging is just to be real, be true to where you are right now. And if you're not at the stage in your career where you have a ton of projects or photos to curate your feed with, that's okay. Show the ugly before photo of the office and take your audience along on a journey with you as you work through your career. So that's kind of like my whole spiel. But even more than that, I also think connecting human to human, because at the end of the day, a designer is not solely hired based on her portfolio. A lot of times it's also the connection that they make. And so find ways to like connect with your audience. I think Lori is a great example of this. I mean, obviously her work is beautiful, but it's her sitting in her car, looking all cute, talking to us, on her IG stories that really makes me connect with her and want me to hire her as a designer. So just find ways to be engaging in the place that you are right now in life, and don't get so overwhelmed by feeling like you have to have this beautifully curated feed. And, contrary to popular belief, there is life outside of social media. There is business outside of social media. And so I think it's still important to nourish those networks and those avenues as well, because as we know, we don't own Instagram, we don't own Facebook, and those things can be taken away from us at any moment. Not that I think that it will, but I mean, there's been designers who have had their accounts hacked and lost all their followers. So just make sure you're also kind of focusing on other ways to grow your business and your network outside of this platform.
Lori, what other tips can you share?
Well, you use the word strategy. What's your social media strategy? And my social media strategy is, does this speak to my ideal client? That's what all of that is, the question for every share, every story, every post, whether it's I love to do installation stories when I have a week-long installation and I'm sharing what that process looks like. I share it because I feel like it's engaging and people see the real truth behind design. I'm also strategizing that I'm showing potential clients how full service my firm is. So I'm multi-layered in what those stories are. And that's why you see me in all states of dress. And, you see me in my play clothes, and you see me in my work clothes, and you see me on a job site, and you see me at the office, and I'm in my garage sometimes. And because there's all aspects to what I'm doing, and I'm sharing that, and Kiana was sweet about it, but there's connection and relationship in design partnerships that I have with my clients. And so them feeling like I'm their person is equally as important as I have the design aesthetic that they would like for their project. So I'm sharing befores or construction sites to say, I don't know if you knew this, but I do new construction. I don't know if you knew this, but I make the cabinetry decisions on site. I don't know if you knew this. So there's teaching and appeal to my potential clients that's happening. And it's natural now because I've found my voice there, but it's all quite strategic. I am for sure running a business. It should be fun to watch, but I'm running a business and speaking to potential clients. And that's how I get my clients also, by the way, 95 or more percent, 95% of my client inquiries come from Instagram.
Wow. That's impactful. So Kiana, authenticity, Lori, storytelling. Robert, I'm going to ask you a scary question that came in from one of our attendees.
I had that whole time to wind up my pitch for that.
And if you want it, and I think it kind of ties in, but let's say I was just joining Instagram today, or I just incorporated my own photography business a week ago, and now it's time to start building my brand on Instagram. Like, how do I get started? How often should I be posting? What should I be thinking about in terms of the story my feed is telling? Because that can be a scary place to start, when you're really playing from behind in some respects.
Well, so I'm going to kind of give how I could tell myself to do it better. My portfolio is my grid. That's where I want to put all my beautiful imagery that people will scroll through. I'm terrible at using stories. I want to be better, but to piggyback off what both ladies kind of said, I'm a big believer in people invest in people. And so I think it's really important as a creative, whether a photographer or a designer, you share some of you on stories, because, and that's going to take a little self-diagnosis and figuring out, who am I? How do I come across? And really highlight those parts of your personality and your day and what you're doing to kind of attract people, so people can see, here's the beautiful work, but here you are as a human, and here's what you can bring to the table. And I think that's really nice to see. And I think it ties into that authenticity. If I was brand new, just get on Instagram today, first off, I wouldn't rush to get on there. If I already have some photography content, I would start really trying to curate what I have and start to come up with a strategy. Say I have 30 images. I don't necessarily want to burn through all those images in 1 month and then not have any new content to share. So I would try to set up a strategy of posting every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or Tuesday, Thursday, and then fill in the in-between days with stories. Whether from a photography standpoint, I was talking about gear and what gear I'd be using for different types of photo shoots, or just more about my personal life. But really trying to make sure you kind of find that voice, find that pattern, and stick with it. I think, especially when people roll through somebody's grid, you don't want it to be a mismatch. You don't want it to be a handful of beautiful images and then an iPhone photo with the lights turned on. I think it's fine to mix in the iPhone imagery. If you're doing that, approach your space the same way a photographer would. Flip off all the lights, pull back the window drapes, let in all the natural light. Make sure you're kind of shooting those elements straight on so your walls are vertical. And that way it just kind of fits the vibe and feels a little bit nicer. And those are images that a designer could run out and get themselves, or lay out a nice display of cabinet hardware with some cabinet options and tile backsplash and get a beautiful image of that. These are good ways to fill your content in your feed without having to go and pull from other designers and saying, oh, I love the way this designer did this. You're kind of showing your own original content.
I think that's important. Leveraging the different content options. let's stick with Instagram differently, whether it's, the behind the scenes, more ephemeral, more in the moment Instagram stories, the highly curated grid. Everybody's using Instagram Reels right now, so figuring out how you tell your stories on Instagram Reels in a way that will resonate with your audiences, and not feeling as though every content type needs to go into one bucket. Is there, Robert, you mentioned Monday, Wednesday, Friday versus Tuesday, Thursday, or posting 30 times per month. Is there a right cadence? Like Lori, how often are you posting to Instagram on a weekly basis?
Ideally 7 days a week, and stories daily or close to daily. And, it's all about connecting and continuing. Really, I almost feel like I've been having, just like my text thread with my girlfriends from high school that I still have, I kind of feel like I'm having one long continuous conversation with the people I hang out with on Instagram. And that's where we hang out, is in stories. And, we've joked that my Instagram is a mullet, and it is business in the front on my grid, and it's a party in the back and stories. And that's really where, the behind the scenes is happening, and things are going wrong, or I might have a failure, or I might have a client who's upset with me, or I might have a topic like this that keeps running through my mind. And that's sort of where I'm sharing that. And I'm often asking for input, because I feel that this social aspect of this is a social platform, and I like to exchange with the people who are spending time with me on Instagram. So lots of questions, lots of, chatting, lots of DMing and things like that. I think it makes it more interesting, makes it feel like we're having a relationship. I definitely feel like I'm having a relationship with people on Instagram, through Instagram.
So that's the second part, right? It's not a one-way street. It's not just me posting photos to my grid and to my stories. It's how am I interacting with my followers, my community, my friends on the platform as well. What are some tricks that you might employ, Kiana, to stay engaged with your followers and not to make it feel as though they're observing or following somebody who isn't aware of the fact that they have fans on the platform?
I'm sorry. There's someone
That's
at my
okay.
door. My dog is going crazy. I think that one of the things that I do is, over time, you'll start to get like a lot of DMs and comments that are thoughtful and more than just like heart eye emojis. And so making sure that I'm actually thoughtful in my response back, thoughtful in my responses in my DMs. And then because I'm more on the lifestyle blogger route, it's important for me to show elements of my life and more real, authentic moments as well. And I think that really resonates with people. I feel like now, especially with everything that was happening with COVID and things like that, like people are just wanting human connection. They're wanting to feel like they are involved in your life or around or know what's happening out in the world. And so any ways that you can kind of take your audience along with you on the day-to-day and ask their advice and their opinion. And when they give it, give thoughtful responses back, makes them feel more involved versus just a viewer.
Thanks, Kiana. So we've got about 4 minutes left. So I wanted to give everybody an opportunity to share some parting thoughts, whether it's with respect to social media strategy, social media etiquette, sharing, any of the topics we might have discussed today. Let's start with you, Robert, and then Kiana, and then Lori, you can close us out.
I would say first, I think this is such a growing process that we're all still learning very much on the big aspect of how to work with brands and things of that nature. I would say my biggest do and don't is still just at least make sure off the bat you're giving credit, make sure you're asking for permission. Please don't place Instagram filters on photos that you paid a lot of money to have in the first place. I mean, that's really, I don't think this is a easy solve for how we're going to handle all the things with social media right off the bat. But I think if you come to a place of definitely asking for permission and then making sure you're applying credit, you're probably at least on the right foot.
Thanks, Robert.
Yeah, I kind of agree with everything he said. I start with asking permission, going into proper credit. I think one thing that Robert touched upon when he was talking about kind of giving some tips on how to, if you're new to Instagram, how to spread out your posts and things like that. I love what he was saying about, showing the equipment that you have. And so not everything has to be a final reveal project photo. If you're a new designer or if you don't have anything to show right now, find other ways to become an expert or an authority in your field, whether that's you hopping on stories and giving advice, whether that's you showing a mood board, showing some, tiles that you're looking at. There's other ways that you can fill up your feed with your own inspiration versus using someone else's photos, because that is still, there's two camps, and I don't think there's a right camp or a wrong camp. I think there's people who want their work to be shared and there's people who don't. And so that's why I always start with the asking permission, because I don't want to think I'm doing a good thing and then, the designer on the other end is rolling their eyes at me. So that's why I always kind of start with the asking of permission, because my heart's intent is to actually honor this person's work who I'm inspired by. So I want to make sure that they feel the same way.
And for me, I think this, what are the rules of social etiquette? And that's kind of the title of what it is that we're talking about here today. And I think that we're developing those rules. And I think having this conversation is important in our community and important to keep us feeling social and feeling good about sharing our work in these social environments. I think the number one rule for me is to share make your feed be social, but do it thoughtfully. And now that we have shared, some of us have shared, and anyone who's listening, that it does matter to some, then now the thoughtful next step is to be respectful and to, you can't make a rule for someone else. So I think furthering this conversation and finding out what it is that people are comfortable with is the only way to behave in polite society, right? That we need to be respectful and thoughtful as we're sharing potentially the work of others or things that we didn't realize was someone's work or didn't see it that way. So I think being open to learning is a big part of establishing what these rules ought to be.
I think that's important, right? Proper attribution, crediting, being respectful of other people's work. It's not optional. It's crucial because, as we saw from our panelists today, there's a lot of energy, hard work, dedication that goes into creating projects, photos, et cetera. So thank you so much to our panelists, Kiana Bowen, Lori Paranjape, and Robert Peterson. Thanks to everybody who attended today's discussion, and thank you to ADAC for devoting a session today to this important topic on social media etiquette. So stay safe, and I hope to connect with you all again soon.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you, Bobby.